Coming on board.
Philip Schofield hits out at his critics, but is called delusional by one ex-colleague as this morning's staff address claims of a toxic working environment. Caught in the crossfire, a special report on the conflict in Sudan and those fleeing across the border.
And all of these people here have come across to look for safety.
Risking their lives to race, we report from the Isle of Man TT as efforts are made to make the competition safer. Plus, painting the town orange, Luton's players and fans come together to celebrate promotion to the Premier League. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. A very good evening. Over the last decade, more than 20,000 people have died or disappeared attempting the world's most dangerous migrant crossing. And yet, the numbers trying to make the journey over the Mediterranean from North Africa to Europe are rocketing. Sky News has witnessed the rescue of 600 people from an overcrowded fishing boat after it was abandoned by its captain. Well, already this year, more than 1,000 people have died attempting to cross the Mediterranean. One of the key routes, known as the Central Mediterranean route, is from Algeria, Tunisia, Libya and Egypt, and sees people make their way towards Italy or Malta. Well, last month alone, more than 14,000 people travelled across the Med via this route. And so far this year, the figure sits at 42,165. This is a 292% increase on the same period last year. Our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons and his team saw the latest rescue firsthand.
We're on the bridge of the Geo Barents, a rescue ship patrolling the Mediterranean on the lookout for migrant vessels in distress.
Yeah, the boat is there already.
And they've seen one, a dot in the distance, but we're heading towards it.
Let's get ready for rescue.
We're joining the rescue crews as they prepare to launch.
So we're kitted up, we are just getting ready to go on the ribs as we approach this fishing boat, which is reported to have hundreds of people on it and is in distress. The Italian Coast Guard are there. They've asked the Geo Barents to carry out the rescue.
In the water, we speed away using two rescue boats. They're known as ribs. The nearer we get, the more people we can see. But it's only when we get right next to the boat that you can work out how every inch of space has been taken. And there are hundreds more people crammed out of sight in the underbelly of the boat. The challenge is to get them all off to safety.
So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board.
It's not a gentle process. There's no time for introductions or niceties. This is about saving lives. Many on board are dehydrated, ill and injured. And among them, babies and young children. Two ribs alternate journeys back to the Geo Barents with 30 or 40 passengers each time. This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. It could probably have carried 30 or 40 people in safety. Instead, there were 606 people who were on board, and they were all brought off alive. Getting people off the rescue boats and onto the Geo Barents is hard work. The boats have to be manoeuvred precisely, and then the passengers transferred, sometimes with particular care. When they arrive, they're all given food, water and new clothes. It must be a bewildering experience. Many of these people expected to die. We meet Hamdi and Assad. They paint a desperate picture. Little food, no water, and suddenly abandoned by their own captain.
He left, he decided to leave us. We didn't know about that, so we're in the middle of the sea. We don't know where it's north, east, south. We're just lost.
The Geo Barents is run by the charity Médecins Sans Frontières. This, the biggest rescue the ship's ever carried out. Around most of Europe, the number of migrants is falling, but in the Mediterranean, it's up 300% this year, So as we head back to port in Italy, the Geo Barents isn't guaranteed a particularly warm welcome. The Italian government says that ships like this are a magnet, that they are effectively giant taxis for economic migrants. It's an accusation the charity denies.
If you ask people why they're leaving their countries, while they're putting all their life and their families in one bag, facing borders, facing a different situation, facing even death, because everyone knows that this route is quite deadly, you will easily understand that there is no way to promote migration.
Already this year, at least 1,000 migrants have died in these waters. And as summer approaches, this route will just get busier.
Well, we can speak to Adam now, who's still at sea in the Mediterranean. Good evening to you, Adam. Extraordinary and harrowing scenes witnessed by you and your team. Do you know what comes next for these people?
Yeah, well, on a very practical level, what happens next is that tomorrow morning, this boat, the Geo Barents, will dock in the Italian town of Bari, and the migrants on board will be disembarked. Now, we don't know how long that process will take. This is the main office for Médecins Sans Frontières on board, and this is where they will be coordinating their side of the deal. They simply don't know. That it might take a few hours, it might take the entire day. There is, of course, a tension, ongoing tension between the people on site on this boat, charity that they work for, and the officials who will be greeting us. And I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat this. The people who are on this boat, these 600 migrants, I think quite a lot of them have a rosy view that they are going to be welcome to Europe. That I've had a number of people saying that they really want to assimilate themselves. They want to be part of Europe. I don't think many of them realize that they may well face actually a rather frosty reception, that there are plenty in Italy and across the continent who resent this migration and who worry about this growing number of people who are coming across the Mediterranean. And yet there are others here who think that this is their chance, that they thought they were going to die on this boat, a miserable, lonely death. They almost think they've been reborn and believe that what they've left behind was awful, and that whatever is in front of them, however unwelcome may be, however many obstacles may be in their path, will be a better life.
Insight, Adam. Thank you. Now, the fallout from Philip Schofield's ITV exit is growing, with tensions visible both on and off screen today. Monday's edition of This Morning began with its presenters addressing claims of a toxic working culture, while Schofield took to social media to hit out at his critics, a move that provoked criticism from one former colleague who described him as delusional. Rachel Venables has more.
Morning, Sarah.
Morning, Sarah.
Who would you like to hear from today?
It was an attempt to show that it was business as usual. But Dermot O'Leary and Alison Hammond did have one message for viewers.
Just from both of us and the whole team here, the crew, the guys downstairs, we love making this show for all of you.
Yeah, we really do. And that's exactly what we're going to do.
Even guests were keen to show that the wholesome image of This Morning wasn't tarnished by recent scandal.
We are very happy to be here. Can I say that as well?
But just 40 minutes before the programme aired, Philip Schofield had dropped this explosive statement on Instagram. I hope you've noticed that it's the same handful of people with a grudge against me or the show who seem to have the loudest voice. This Morning is the best show to work on with the best people. In all the years I worked there was no toxicity. Philip Schofield and other This Morning presenters are denying these allegations of a toxic culture on the show, but rumours are swirling about how much ITV bosses knew of his relationship with a younger male colleague and whether it was hushed up. ITV say they investigated the allegations, but that both parties denied any involvement. But now former friends and colleagues are turning on each other. Former This Morning co-host Eamon Holmes tweeted, Schofield has just put out a delusional statement. Like Holly, he puts it on Insta stories, so if it goes wrong, there's no record after 24 hours. I'm reluctant to give the liar any more publicity. But believe me, Pip, if you are looking for a fight, you have picked on the wrong person.
Male pattern baldness is 95% of hair loss.
It comes after the programme's former doctor said he raised concerns about bullying and discrimination on the show, but claims he was then managed out for whistleblowing. ITV shares have gone down. The question now is whether the damage to the brand will last.
If there are more mistakes, if there are more debris, then that's going to fly up in their face and it's going to cause them a lot of problems with the brand. But they're hanging tough. And I think that there are lots of occasions. They weathered the Quaygate storm, arguably, when news came out of how many other journalists jumped the queue. They didn't lose advertisers. They didn't lose audiences. So they're used to this.
Holly Willoughby is expected to return to co-host This Morning next week, but the future of the programme remains uncertain.
And our correspondent Rachel Venables joins me now from outside Television Centre in West London, where This Morning is filmed. And a lot of speculation, Rachel, about the future of the show.
Absolutely, and you have to bear in mind that the appeal of This Morning has always been in its syrupy, sweet, family-friendly image. You know, the sight of Phil and Holly, two seemingly, and I think it was true for many years, best friends on the sofa together in the studio here at Television Centre in West London. That was how they sold the programme, and that's what the audiences loved. But that has been really badly damaged with all of these revelations in the last few days. Whether the damage is permanent, whether it's fatal, of course we'll have to wait and see. Bosses here will certainly hope that that's not the case, but they've been dealing with a firestorm over the last few weeks from, of course, that really clear-cut moment when Philip Schofield put out that statement on Friday, and then over the weekend and into today you've had people speaking out about what's supposedly, allegedly been described as a toxic culture, including former presenter Eamon Holmes, contributors as well, talking about, as you heard in that report, being managed out after whistleblowing. This is what is now facing this beloved programme. We're waiting, of course, as I mentioned, for Holly Willoughby to return to the show. So real questions there as to who will co-present with her if she does return next week. Will she acknowledge it? And as I've already mentioned, in the medium to long term, if there aren't any more allegations, or if there are, can the show survive? We'll have to wait and see.
OK, Rachel, thanks very much. Plans for the Metropolitan Police to stop attending 999 calls involving mental health incidents have caused alarm among healthcare and charity bosses. The Force's commissioner believes the move will free up officers from incidents they're not trained to deal with. But there are fears it could put vulnerable people at an increased risk. Our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, reports.
In his first weeks as the new commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley singled out dealing with mental health issues as a major distraction for his officers. Too many hours spent waiting with patients in hospital emergency centres. Not enough time, said the commissioner, preventing and fighting crime. Retired Met Police officer Chris Hobbs blamed public health spending cuts.
Mental health hospitals have closed or been reduced in size. The whole mental health service is under stress, so the police have had to pick up the slack. And basically they've said, well, we can't do this anymore.
The commissioner says from the end of August, his officers will stop answering emergency calls involving mental health patients unless life is at risk. In a letter to health and social care providers, Sir Mark Rowley wrote, "Every day that we permit the status quo to remain, we are collectively failing patients and are not setting up officers to succeed. We are failing them first by sending police officers, not medical professionals, to those in mental health crisis." He said officers were spending more than 14 hours handing patients over to medical staff, taking up 10,000 hours of officer time each month. Last month, he said, only 30% of 999 calls were actually crime-related.
I think it is worrying for patients and service users of mental health to think that in London at the end of August, there is no other number to call. At the moment, there is only 999 that relatives can call when someone's in that crisis, and that's not going to change between now and the 30th of August.
Scotland Yard has called for an urgent meeting with health chiefs. The Commissioner is confident in his threat to stop responding to all but life-threatening mental health crises, because he knows it's worked elsewhere. A pilot scheme in Humberside brought police, health and charity staff together. It could be adopted nationally, eventually, but the Met says it can't wait for that. Martin Brunt, Sky News at New Scotland Yard.
Uganda's president has approved one of the world's toughest anti-LGBTQ laws, increasing the maximum punishment to the death penalty. The move has provoked international condemnation. The UK government says it's appalled by the new law, while US President Joe Biden said it was a tragic violation of human rights. Ethnic Serbs in northern Kosovo have clashed with police after attempting to storm public buildings. Demonstrations have been ongoing since Friday in a dispute over local elections held last month. The NATO-led KFOR peacekeeping force said that 25 of its troops were injured in the clashes. Serbia has put its military on high alert and sent more troops to the border with Kosovo. To Ukraine now, where Russian ballistic missiles targeted the capital, Kyiv, in a rare daytime attack this morning. Many residents in Kyiv were forced to seek shelter underground. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi reports.
It is almost a daily occurrence as Moscow steps up its aerial bombardment of Ukrainian towns and cities. This time, the strike was during daylight hours. It was the middle of the morning when a barrage of missiles rained down on the capital. These images show terrified children running through the streets looking for cover. All of the rockets were shot down, but falling fragments caused a number of casualties.
A piece of debris fell near my house. I thought I had dropped something. Then I saw on our house group chat that something fell near to our house. I went out to look, and there was a fragment of a rocket lying there.
And for the frightened residents, it means hunkering down underground when the air raid sirens sound.
I heard 2 or 3 explosions, and then I heard 5 or 7 more explosions. That's when I realized something terrible was happening. I read the telegram channels and thought it'd be best to go to the subway after all.
There have been at least 15 attacks this month alone, mostly at night. Officials claim Russia is changing its tactics to try to evade Ukraine's air defense systems.
They know that we have improved our capacity a lot, and right now they're trying different tactics to have us fire all our missiles, to have us show where the locations of the air defense systems are, and of course to take down the morale of the people.
The intensity of Russia's raids is increasing ahead of Ukraine's anticipated counter-offensive. People here are expecting more attacks in the coming days. Alex Rossi, Sky News.
With the conflict in Sudan still simmering, the violence of Darfur's ethnic conflict, condemned by the world in 2003, has returned. More than 1 million people have been displaced internally by the recent conflict in Sudan, while more than 330,000 have fled to 5 neighbouring countries: Egypt, Chad, the Central African Republic, South Sudan and Ethiopia. Well, Chad has taken in 90,000 refugees, the second highest number of those 5 countries. Our correspondent, Yusra El-Bagir, begins this next report from eastern Chad, where fighting can be seen across the border in Sudan, in the town of Mistore.
One of West Darfur's largest border towns, Mistore, is burning. And as the Chadian military approach, they can do nothing but watch. As we were approaching, it looked like mist over the valley, but as we got closer, you can see that it's plumes of smoke rising above villages that have been scorched by ethnic conflict. We drive further east and find its latest victims. Seeking shelter under every other tree, still in a state of shock. في ناس ماتوا People are dying, and Shama says the war is still raging. I ask her if they'll come seeking treatment, but she says they're still trapped inside. This is the crossing point, a dried riverbed. They're safe in Chad now, but can still see and hear the signs of wreckage. This valley is officially Darfur, and just across the way you can hear gunfire still ringing out of the villages where fighting continues. And all of these people here have come across to look for safety from what they see is a continued targeted assault. You can hear it now. She says that's the sound of rifles, the very rifles that they fled to come here. Is your family there? I ask. The chorus replies yes. They're in there being killed. Some stay on the border to bear witness, while in Adri, the wounded start coming in. Just 3 years old, even Bilal wasn't spared from the bullets. And his older sister is forced to watch. Their mother is still trapped, but many are making their way out. This man and his son have escaped the regional capital of El Jenaina, where a massacre has been reported. I ask him to tell me what's happening there. He says death, daily death. The survivors keep streaming in, pained by bullet wounds and a familiar, grim reality. Yusr al-Bagher, Sky News, Eastern Chad.
Now, since its inauguration in 1907, the Isle of Man TT race has seen 266 fatalities. It's considered to be one of the most dangerous motorcycle events on the planet. But competitors are still queuing up for this month's race despite the inherent risks. Rob Harris reports.
Everywhere there's danger. Nowhere's more dangerous in motorsport. And yet they keep coming to compete.
I'm not forced to be here, I want to be here. It's an obvious risk.
Risks riders have been taking for 116 years at the Isle of Man TT, with the course death toll reaching 266 after 6 more fatalities in 2022. But no one here, especially not the island's fastest ever racer, wants to contemplate banning the world's oldest motorcycle race.
After the tragedies of last year, did you have any trepidation about coming back this year to compete?
Not at all, no. I mean, a lot of people think we're just crazy or idiots. You take your brain out, put your helmet on. It's very, very much the opposite effect. So you've really got to use your brain and you've got to take the risk when you want to take the risk or if it's necessary. But life is short as it is, you know. I would rather go away doing something like this than I would crossing the road and getting run over by a bus.
But this is where no one wants to end up. A rider has been injured on the first morning of racing, and they arrive at hospital as we're meeting the event's medical chief.
The circuit's 37 miles long approximately. We're about 20 miles from some of the patients, so having the helicopters is absolutely essential. It gets the doctor and the paramedic there literally within minutes, so a vital piece of our response.
Speeds can reach 200 miles an hour. In racing, compared to jumping out of a plane without a parachute, padding on lampposts offers little protection. It's around here a father and son, Roger and Bradley Stockton, crashed in a sidecar race and died last year. It's racing round these residential streets that makes the Isle of Man TT so thrilling, so compelling, yet so dangerous. It's so perilous that World Championship status was lost in the 1970s. Yet new safety measures organisers insist should reduce the risk of more riders dying here.
It is inherently dangerous. We're racing high-performance motorcycles on a closed public road, and those dangers are obvious. There is a kind of constant battle to manage those risks that are avoidable that sit around this to try and make it as safe as possible.
To win, you must risk dying without the rewards of other sports. Grief goes with the glory. Rob Harris, Sky News on the Isle of Man.
Football now, and Luton Town's players and fans have come together to celebrate the club's promotion to the Premier League. Thousands of people came out for a civic parade, and our correspondent Milena Veselinovic was among the crowds.
They started the season as underdogs, but they made it to the top of their game. Luton Town players getting a hero's homecoming for reaching the top flight of English football for the first time in more than 30 years.
Voice is gone, as you can see and hear. But yeah, I mean, 48 hours has been a whirlwind. Still quite hasn't sunk in yet. And I mean, yeah, we're just here to celebrate this wonderful day with the town.
This is a very rare moment. You don't get many moments like this in your career, so I think all we've got to do now is enjoy it, soak every bit of it up.
And the town was soaking it up too. The fans painting it orange and coming out in force for a team which they say made history.
It feels like the whole town is out celebrating. People feel proud. They feel that their team was the underdog, but they came out on top. And they have now come out to say their thanks to them.
For many here, the win was truly a dream come true.
So we were at Wembley, and it was just like, you know, we were still pinching ourselves. We think it's a dream.
It's just a really proud moment for the town. You know, Luton Town had its struggles and the team's had its struggles over the years. And yeah, it's just so nice to be here.
And it's that positive momentum that the town now wants to build on, hoping that the team's success on the pitch will mean better fortunes for everyone.
It's jobs, lots of opportunities for our young people. I'm a teacher and I want them to have a bright future where they can call Luton their home. They can go study wherever they want, but they come back to Luton and they stay here.
And you think this win might help that as well?
Absolutely, because instead of looking at all these other big cities, Luton will be their home where they can build a future for themselves.
Here we go then, ladies and gentlemen!
A future that will see Luton's players facing off with the best of them. After 3 decades, finally back in the big time. Milena Veselinovic, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll be taking a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview, including this story on the front of the Metro about the latest criticism of Philip Schofield by Eamon Holmes. Their headline, "The Gloves Are Off." And tonight, we're joined by political correspondent at the Financial Times, Jasmine Cameron-Chileshi, and former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. There they are, standing by. See you after this short break. Welcome back. This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Sky News has witnessed how 600 people had to be rescued from the world's most dangerous migrant crossing in the Mediterranean. Philip Schofield has defended this morning as it came under fire with claims of toxicity amid furore over his affair with a younger colleague. Health chiefs have expressed concerns over plans for the Metropolitan Police officers not to attend emergency calls if they're linked to mental health incidents. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. And in the next half an hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with political correspondent at the Financial Times, Jasmine Cameron-Cheleshi, and former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. There they are, standing by. But first, let's see what's on some of those front pages. The gloves are off. That's how the Metro describes the latest exchanges between former presenters Philip Schofield and Eamon Holmes over the behind-the-scenes culture at top ITV show this morning. Boris Johnson's WhatsApp account and what it might reveal to the COVID-19 inquiry's top story for The Times, which says a legal wrangle is looming over getting the messages released. The Mail leads with what it calls fury at Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer over a £1.5 million donation to the party from a top funder of the Just Stop Oil movement and demands it should be returned. The Mirror speaks to the mother of a 10-year-old boy killed by a dangerous dog who is backing the paper's campaign for government action to stop more such cases. The Eye reveals that people could be asked to recycle less waste to cut down on the number of non-recyclable items finding their way into the recycling system and having to be rejected. The Express says that high street banks are under increasing pressure to offer better rates to savers after a Which report found rates at the moment are often meagre and unjustifiable. The Financial Times leads with news that Labour is planning to force major landowners to sell off plots cheaply if it gets into power in an effort to cut the cost of building new homes. And that is also the top story on the front of tomorrow's Guardian. While The Star tells us that experts think we've been drinking our beer the wrong way and that it needs to have more of a head on it because it's better for your bell. There you go. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during this programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. Let's speak now to the political correspondent at the Financial Times, Jasmine Cameron-Cheleshi, and former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng, who are here with us to review the papers this evening. Great to have you both with us. Thanks so much. Anita, I'll kick off with you first, if I may, because we're going to be talking about the front page of the Metro, their headline leading on this ongoing storm at ITV. Their headline, "The gloves are off." What's this article saying?
Yeah, so this updates the world on the latest furore between presenters and former presenters now of ITV. So this is Philip Schofield opting on his Instagram page to effectively dismiss the claims of toxicity behind the scenes at ITV's This Morning, to which the former presenter Eamon Holmes, who left the programme in 2021, according to the paper, has then responded on Twitter saying, "You don't want to pick a fight with me, Pip." It's all quite public now, the row between the former presenters and obviously the bad feeling ever since Philip Schofield was sacked as a result of what has been reported to be conduct with or carrying on with an employee who was there at quite a young age. So it's definitely something that has kept ITV's This Morning in the front pages over the past few days, and this is a sign that it perhaps might not be abating anytime soon.
Yeah, certainly the storm rumbles on and the future of the show in doubt, very much so. Now, Jasmine, to you next. Let's talk about the front page of The Guardian, because just so the viewers are aware, you've asked not to comment tonight on This Morning, given that you are moving to ITV later this summer. So let's talk about the front page of The Guardian. Labour to let councils buy land cheaply to tackle the housing crisis. This story on 2 of the front pages today.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting story, and it looks at the fact that Labour officials are discussing plans to give local authorities powers to buy up land cheaply and then develop it. And of course, we know that housing is set to be one of the key issues going into the next general election, be that what's happening in the rental market or what's happening with mortgages or trying to get more first-time buyers on the ladder. So it's a very interesting set of proposals that the party are discussing. And of course, Labour officials know that actually if they put forward a strong electoral offer, particularly to those aged between 21 and 40, those individuals who typically would be getting on the housing ladder, would be starting families and would traditionally be voting, becoming more conservative with age, but statistics show that that's not happening. And so Labour officials feel like if they can tap into that core voter base, actually they've got a strong offer to put to the public. And it will be quite interesting to see how CCHQ, how the Levelling Up Department engage with these brief proposals, and perhaps they'll try to offer some sort of counter or alternative going closest to the election.
Yeah, and Anita, is there anything you'd like to add to this? Keir Starmer is under fire for his promise to make it easier to build on the green belt as well.
Yeah, and he's got this sort of broader ambition to have 70% of people in the UK to be homeowners. And it's very clear that Labour doesn't really have a clear idea about how they're going to achieve this. So it's interesting that we've got this announcement now about compulsory purchase orders, and I won't bore your viewers by trying to explain exactly how this works, but effectively local councils can acquire land in quite limited circumstances. And there's an indication here from this story that they're going to allow local councils to go much further than that. But I don't see here a clear indication of how this would make a demonstrable difference to the broader housing ecosystem, in particular around house building, because often councils acquire property basically for development purposes and not for necessarily straight for building houses. So again, I think it's a lot of ideas, Labour sort of slightly throwing things at the wall and seeing what things would make a difference, because actually increasing house building substantially is quite a significant challenge. And I think it's interesting that Labour thinks this is winning ground. And it's certainly clear that the public want to see more house building, but achieving that, it's actually quite complicated. It's not clear that there is a comprehensive plan for delivering that.
OK, and just on political and policy ideas, Jasmine, this story inside tomorrow's Metro about Rishi Sunak's plans to perhaps put a price cap on the cost of essential goods to help with the cost of living crisis. It certainly sounds, according to this article, that there are some industry figures who doubt whether it will work.
Yeah, so these ideas were briefed to the weekend papers. I think they first emerged in the Sunday Telegraph. This idea that ministers were discussing perhaps a voluntary cap on essential items. Now, we all know, anyone that's gone to a supermarket, we've seen the price of basic goods like milk, eggs, bread, cheese, dairy, all of this has gone up, and it really is impacting particularly lower income families. And so the government has briefed out these proposals, but there really has been a bit of a backlash on all sides. So you've had Conservative MPs and ministers who were very instinctively against what they feel is excessive state intervention, basically arguing that this isn't really a Conservative proposal. And then you have leading business figures arguing that actually this isn't really going to make much of a difference, and it just feels a little bit like posturing. So it seems as though the government is scrambling to look as though it's got some effective proposals to bring down inflation. Now, if we remember, bringing down inflation is one of Sunak's 5 pledges to the public, that he wants to halve inflation by the end of the year. So obviously there's a little bit of a mad scramble at the top of government as to how they go around doing that, you know, how they create a perception that actually the government is on top of this issue and is doing all it can and exhausting all channels to really look as though it's on the side of the voters, on the side of consumers, to get some of those prices down.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, this idea, Anita? What do you make of this, you know, mad scramble at the top of the government, as Jasmine put it there? What do you think's going on as a former Conservative advisor?
I wouldn't quite call it a mad scramble, but I do think that the figures out earlier in the week about inflation, and particularly about the levels of core inflation that we're now seeing in our economy, is deeply worrying. And I think a sincere concern in number 10 and likewise in HMT about the level of inflation that now seems to be slightly bedding its way in, and what that means for people, because inflation does, sort of destroy the economy for a lot of people in terms of how much poorer it can make people. And the government doesn't have a huge number of levers that it can use to support that. And we know that the supermarkets are very much, wanting to do their best for consumers. So I think it makes sense to me that the government would want to talk to those retailers and say, look, what more can we do to make sure that across core areas, and particularly when it's purchasing items that people who are poorer will see and feel that inflationary hit much higher, what can we do to keep those prices down at a point where food inflation is at a 30-year high? So I think it makes sense for the government to be having those conversations. It doesn't look like the government is looking at regulating, and it's much more about a voluntary agreement. But if it does come off in some fashion, I think that would really help some of the poorest people who are really struggling with food prices.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Let's just talk about the front page of tomorrow's Mail, Jasmine, before we go to a short break. Fury at Starmer's £1.5 million from Just Stop Oil donor, their headline tomorrow morning, saying that Keir Starmer is under fire over donations to Labour from a key funder to Just Stop Oil.
Yeah, and I do think we will probably see more and more of these stories heading into the general election, as there's a lot more scrutiny over where parties are getting their money from, who's donating what, the stories behind these figures. And of course, Just Stop Oil is the environmental group that has been embroiled in some level of controversy over the past few months over some of the tactics that it's used to get its messaging across. And so in that light, particularly, and there are individuals who are arguing that Starmer shouldn't have accepted the money or now should return the money as some sort of gesture. I'd be sceptical as to whether that would actually take place. But I think, as I say, there'll be more and more of these stories and more of a bit of a rifling through, the party's expenses and figuring out who's funding some of these political parties and how much we can read into that.
Yeah, Anita, your thoughts on this story? Certainly Just Stop Oil has divided opinion in the way they've carried out some of their protests.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that's more concerning really is we've seen the announcement recently from Keir Starmer about stopping North Sea oil drilling. And that's obviously about whether the UK can remain energy secure. So there's clear indication here, I think, that Just Stop Oil, or whether it's via this connection from the donor or whatever, is impacting the Labour Party policy. And that's where I think there are some genuine concerns, because the UK isn't yet at a stage where it can only use renewable energy, for instance, and therefore you're in a situation where either the UK is producing its own oil and gas, or the UK is buying it on the global market. And we've seen what's happened to global oil and gas prices recently. So I think there is a broad and more serious concern about energy security in the future if Keir Starmer's policy comes to fruition. But I think an interesting, Jasmine said, sorry, I don't know why I had a brain fade on your name there. I think that as we get closer to the election, there'll be more scrutiny about the motivations behind some of these big policies that will be coming from both political parties.
Yeah, don't worry, Anita. A brain freeze is a real thing, isn't it? We'll leave you both to rest your brains momentarily. Stand by. Thanks very much. And do stay with us, because coming up, we'll be looking ahead to more of tomorrow's front pages, including this on the front of The Guardian. Alarm over Met vow to quit mental health role. More in a minute after this short break.
I'm Becky Johnson, a Sky News correspondent, part of the team based here in the Midlands. Allegations of exploitation in Leicester's clothing factories aren't new. In fact, it's been an open secret in this city for years. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
We're getting more and more stabbings, and essentially I think it's more and more younger children. As a team, we're not really surprised by anything these days.
So there's reports of a male who's been stabbed repeatedly in the leg.
Here in the diverse industrial heart of England, we hear from people who have real stories to tell.
Parents are going to complain like this, and schools had better get ready for it.
These protests are being organised primarily by people who aren't parents at the school.
So some patients aren't going to survive this.
We have to be prepared that patients will die from this illness.
Staff here are currently identifying wards that could be turned into areas where patients with COVID-19 could be isolated. The River Severn is still rising, and people here in Ironbridge have been told it could go up by another metre before it starts to go back down.
It's going to be a long, slow process of putting it back together again.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview, and with me is the political correspondent at the Financial Times, Jasmine Cameron-Chileshi, and former Conservative Special Advisor, Anita Boateng. Good to have you back with us. Let's speak to you first, Jasmine, if I may. The front page of The Guardian covering this story that we've been covering today about the Metropolitan Police and the decision by the Commissioner not to respond to mental health calls unless there's a threat to life. Your thoughts on this?
Yes, there's been a bit of a, been a bit of unease in response to his calls. So obviously this comes at a time where there's a lot of pressure on the Metropolitan Police at the moment to get to grips with, just basic crimes, things like burglary, things like fraud. Also, we know the Met has been embroiled in lots of concern over its handling of misogyny within its ranks, particularly after the murder of Sarah Everard. So what we're really seeing is a senior figure from the Met Police arguing that actually the police for a long time have also been, they've been effectively a form of social services as well as crime reduction and prevention. And he's arguing that the force really needs to get back to basics and just focus on its main remit. Now, obviously, lots of campaigners and people that work in the NHS have warned that actually this creates a gap where if the police are stepping back from this role that they've been filling, actually do the health services and do the local authorities have the resources to give people adequate support when they are having a mental health crisis and they are looking for somewhere to turn. And I think it speaks to the fact that many of our public services, many of our local services in particular, are really feeling a level of strain, be that for funding or general resources. And I think this letter really kind of gets to the heart of the really tough decisions that a lot of local organisations are having to make on a day-to-day basis about how they allocate their resources.
Yeah, certainly there does seem to be a real problem with provision Anita. And certainly we were discussing this earlier on Sky News, and one viewer messaged me to say, you know, there are crisis teams available for people who know who to call, and not everyone does. But even if you do call that crisis number, not always, you know, it isn't always the case that your call gets answered.
Yes, and I think that there is a kind of broader issue. The Met Police have obviously had a tumultuous past few years, but this is a problem that is impacting lots of police services. And The Guardian, that originally kind of broke the story about this Met Police letter, had some studies in Humber Police, which I believe, which showed that them having implemented this scheme where health professionals came to those mental health calls rather than police, if there weren't this sort of imminent threat, did make a difference in terms of freeing up some police resource. So I think that I would want to be led by the evidence here. And if there is some indication that actually this means that things are dealt with at a more appropriate level and you have police able to deal with other situations for which they might be better trained, I think that makes sense. And I think in the situation where there is not a lot of resource to go around, thinking about the evidence and allowing that to be the decider about who responds to these cases seems to make sense to me.
Let's move on to a story inside the Metro now, Jasmine. This daytime attack on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, today. Certainly, it's very rare for the capital to be attacked during daylight hours, and it's been an absolutely terrifying event for civilians there.
Yeah, and so the Metro is reporting that the head of Ukraine's military intelligence has effectively issued a stark warning to President Putin, saying that there will be some sort of revenge attack in retaliation for what has been perceived to be a dramatic escalation of the conflict so far. As you say, to have an attack of this nature in daytime does signal a slight change in tactics. And I think it's just another reminder that, you know, this war really doesn't show many signs of ending. I think perhaps at the very beginning of the conflict, there was hope on the Russian end that perhaps this would be an easy conflict for them to win. But obviously, we know that Ukraine, helped with, alongside Western allies, have put up fierce resistance. And it does seem as though both sides are effectively digging in. Both sides are ramping up in terms of the tactics and weaponry used. And so, and unfortunately, it's the civilians of Ukraine that are caught up in the middle of this and end up having to live the very real consequences of this conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. And Anita, front page of the Eye, so-called wish cycling, government plans to crack down on it. We actually talk about this a lot at home, that if you throw something in the recycling that you can't recycle, it's actually worse, because then potentially the whole load of rubbish gets thrown into waste.
Absolutely. And I think that often councils do their best in terms of trying to educate people about what goes in and what goes out. But I think there is a lot more work to do, especially around the condition of things and whether they should be put in at that state, because the amount it costs to kind of make things recyclable in terms of cleanliness, etc., that's all part of the equation. And I think that households want to do their bit to make sure that they can recycle. So it's all worth everyone grabbing the front page of the Metro and giving it a good read.
Absolutely. Anita, Jasmine, great stuff. We'll see you again next hour. Thanks very much indeed. Let's have a look at the weather now, shall we?
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
This week looks mostly dry with plenty of sunshine, but northern and eastern coastal areas will be cooler and cloudier at times, with some wind off the sea too. There'll be a mainly fine if chilly start tomorrow, with a ground frost possible in a few areas, but central and eastern England and many northern Scottish coasts will be rather dull. The morning will bring plenty of sunshine to most, with cloud over northeast Scotland and central England, slowly burning off inland, but eastern England will remain largely overcast.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.